Sorry. Yes, just a request. Can everybody use their microphones in this meeting? Not just for the web, but also we've got the examiner here, Tony Earnshaw's here, and I understand he may be doing some audio recordings himself of our meeting, which I think is completely okay with. Okay, so welcome to the first Corporate Scrutiny panel of 2020. We'll just go for the first item, membership of the committee.
We've got apologies from Councillor Akhtar and Councillor Lawson, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll see if the other members turn up a little later. Minutes of the previous meeting. Do you just want to have a look at those and let's see if there are any items on here which anybody's got any questions about? No. Okay, we'll move to the first item. Oh, I also need to mention that we will be moving around items 9 and items 8. We'll be swapping those round. So preparation to leave the EU will be moved forward, and equal and equality and diversity will swap with that. Okay, interests. Any interests to declare? Nope. Admission of the public, they are welcome. Deputations and petitions, we have none. Public question time? No public, no questions. Right, straight onto the approach to commercialisation, and Phil Deaton, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'll just take you very briefly through the report on commercialisation. Previously came in sort of mid-July just about preliminary work, developing an approach or a strategy to commercialisation. At that time, and certainly within the report, it's outlined there's no consistent definition. You can see that in 2.1, but there are sort of key components and they're highlighted within that section. Scrutiny kind of requested more information about the types of initiatives that other local authorities were undertaking, and what more detail about maybe what Kirklees could incorporate into a future work programme. So Appendix A to the report gives examples that are in the public domain of work across local authorities, and they're quotes from LGC, LGA, the Best Practice Map, APSI, etc. Appendix B goes to give us some case studies. I think the case studies was a term mentioned last time. I took them from the Municipal Journal sort of winners of the Best Commercial Council for the last couple of years. And you might note that Rushcliffe, which is quote there, came to do a commercialisation workshop in November for Kirklees that was organised through the LGA. The Office of Proposals for an Initial Action Plan are summarised in 210 and 211 of the report. It's fair to say that with the broad definition of commercialisation, there's activity undergoing elsewhere throughout the council at the moment. One example being Treasury Management and the approach to likely Local Authority Property Fund. I think the key principle to mention is that any commercial approach, any activity initiative we considered obviously has to support and align to the council's values and priorities, and there are some kind of principles within under this theme that are highlighted in 2.7. External income throughout the council is just under 80 million, and I'll just point to a couple of areas probably within the report. I think there's lots of potential in just understanding the true cost of the services we provide and the prices we charge, the income or the benefits generated, because many of the activities that we undertake have probably originated from statutory duties previously, ending up now being discretionary. There's definitely scope to look at how we maximise our utilisation of venues, and there's been some early work with regarding town halls, looking at some investment within there to increase sort of the events, wedding parties, etc. within sort of Dewsbury. There's also work undertaken with the partnership work we're doing with schools to review school traded services. We introduced a new system in February of last year, and we're looking at working with them of how we can ensure that the traded services meet their demands and are flexible to their needs. And just the last point I would make as an introduction is that we're going around the various senior leadership teams within the council to make sure this is a corporate document, and just see whether they are collect what commercial ideas and opportunities other people see as existing.
Thank you. Just hand over to members. Let Councillor Taylor get settled. Okay.
There's a couple of things I'd just pick up from your high-level action plan. One being that you have a line for capture new and innovative commercial ideas, which seems to run for Q3, Q4, and then again next year. But I would have thought that was something, or Q3 to Q1 actually. I would have thought that would be a continuous process of capturing ideas and allowing people to brainstorm when they want to.
I'd agree. I think it's an initial going around some of the senior leadership teams. This does not end. I accept that, and we'll continually collect. But it's just to make sure that as we're positioning this, we're getting people's early ideas.
Okay, another one. And the other point is that if the targeted approach projects, like reviewing back office processes, are you in a position where you might be able to work with joint ventures and actually promote that and support more other organisations with back office processes?
I think we're looking at all alternatives. The specific item in there was probably looking at how we collect the income and the payment side of it and how efficient that process is. It doesn't lead to bad debt, and ideally, I suppose we know why we're giving credit in the first place.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things I'm looking at here was one element of commercialisation, I guess, would be income targets. And looking at the amount of income that we get. I mean, is that approach properly embedded across the whole of the council as where it's appropriate? Have we got income targets for appropriate sections?
As part of the budget process, every service will have an income target and will be monitored against that. As a traded service, sometimes it might be the bottom line, so obviously look at your expenditure and your income and look at what the overall target is. But every service does have that, and I think that's reviewed sometimes within the budget process.
One of the things I've noticed is obviously we've obviously got a lot of commercial property ourselves. We hold that, and so I know that there are. I'd be really interested to know how do we make that transparent to members more widely about how we're doing in terms of income targets with things like commercial property and income targets more generally.
Obviously, any of that information can be brought at any time. I think with the commercial property, there's about 300 assets. There'll be more sort of tenancies, etc. And I think it brings in from memory about 2.5 million. But ultimately, we're looking about the sustainability of that and the suitability of some of those properties. The occupancy level is fairly high, but actually, is it right we hold everything we currently do? Have we invested correctly, or are there other things we might want to acquire or dispose of? So all of those things will be considered as part of that. The mechanism of getting it back to members, I suppose I'd take a bit of advice.
Thank you. I'll just add to that as part of the revamped Council Treasury Management and Investment Strategy, following CITFA updated code and guidance, it now includes an enhanced section on investment strategy, and it actually has in view where we've got commercial investments as well. So it's at quite a high level, but it is now reported as a matter of course. So it does capture some of the things that Phil has stated at a high level. So it is there in the public domain, and it is reported. And the next iteration of the annual Treasury Management Strategy and Investment Strategy will be coming shortly to Corporate Governance and Audit Committee, and then on to Cabinet and Budget Council. So I think that reflects a concerted effort nationally through CITFA and government as well to have more transparency in the way that local authorities publish information regarding the kinds of investments they hold and the kinds of current yields that they hold. To have that degree of transparency and hold ourselves more accountable, really. I think initially from a risk perspective, but also from an opportunity perspective as well.
On I'll let Councillor Turner speak at this.
A couple of points, Chair. Going back to the commercial property, we do have a very high occupancy rate, so that does really well, and we do review that as part of the budget process, and etc. charge, etc. One of the things that we want to go back to is we mentioned about the bottom line and the commercialisation of certain parts of the organisation. What we have to do is, with that, as well as having an income target, it's fine to give them a target to say this department must deliver this amount of income. But we need to be careful that when we're doing that we're not passing a cost on to organisations that are already struggling. So we have to apply social value to that. I think one of the mistakes we made some time ago was we said to parts of the organisation, we wanted to generate this much income, and they went out and started charging people shed loads of money, and some of the people couldn't afford to shed loads of money. So we have to be careful how we approach it. So we can't just go, we're going to make this amount of money. We have to apply social value principles to it, and that's one of the things that we're working through as well, and it's quite clear in 2.5 that that's one of the driving factors. Yes, of course we want income, but we don't want to then destroy organisations that add value to the council and do great stuff for us on other parts of the voluntary sector, etc. So there's a balance to be struck, and I have to say that we've had the last few weeks we've had some really interesting meetings with officers working on this, and that I genuinely think at this moment in time we've got a really good strong team in looking at this, and I think in the next 12 to 18 months we'll see some really positive developments, as alluded to, some investments going into both town halls to make them to generate some more income. So we're heading in the right direction. Like anything in a large organisation, it doesn't turn around easily, but I genuinely think we're heading in the right direction, and there's some really exciting ideas that are going to come up in the next 12 to 18 months.
Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, apologies for late arrival. The meeting overran. It's just a question really, and I don't understand if there is a difference or not, but under the projects we've got Cliff House and museums, one described as a master plan and one as a business plan. I don't understand the difference between the two, or is there a nuance in that or not?
I think it's probably just terminology. I don't think there is a difference now. I think in museums they've used the word business plan and master. Yes, so they're interchangeable. Apologies for the confusion.
So thank you for going through the municipal journal and coming up with some examples for us. One of the things that I'm quite interested in is how we actually systematically, if you like, look at opportunities, because we've talked in the past last meeting about how do we actually become more entrepreneurial, how do we take more risks, how do we take risks which are good risks to take. And I look at some of the things down here, I think, hey, that could be something we could do. Obviously I look at something like a solar farm, and I think, actually, have we got land that would be that could be used for such a purpose, which is marginal land perhaps, which might be good for that. Robin Hood Energy, I know a wee bit about that. I know it's got its issues and its problems, so there are examples out there, but Bristol had an energy company as well, which had huge problems. Actually run by a former Kirklees employee for a while, so I understand. But there we go. So how do we actually systematically look at opportunities to make sure that we are looking at things that we might be able to do?
I think from the sphere of the commercialisation, obviously it links to the asset strategy and what assets, if it's largely to do with buildings or lands in the examples you've given. And it's just raising the profile that I suppose all options should be considered. I suppose it's the pace and at the right time and making sure that that potential's not been lost. So I think there's work on the asset strategy being pulled together. As was an earlier comment, all ideas will be collected at any point of time, and it's just prioritising those. So it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but I'm trying to say that there are other mechanisms that we'll feed into, and as long as this is a consideration at that time, hopefully it'll be one of the options considered.
I guess from a scrutiny point of view, what I would say is we ought to be finding a way of systematically finding a way of bringing opportunities in and making sure that those are put in. One of the things I mentioned last time, and I've got a feeling it's going to become a hobby horse with me, is the idea of a communities opportunities register as well as a communities risk register. So we actually have a way of actually saying that within the organisation that we have a culture of looking at opportunities that we might take. Eamon Croston.
Yeah, fully agree with that, and I know it was raised at a previous meeting as well. I think, certainly from a corporate organisational perspective, we've got the eighth outcome in the corporate plan around efficient and effective organisation. That covers a multitude of things, and things like best value and value for money in all its guises is a key part of that. I think through the capital planning process, we're already, certainly among officers, promoting ideas around, as Phil alluded to earlier, particularly around self-funded schemes that generate income opportunities. Why wouldn't we want to promote those if they fit with the sort of priority ambitions of the council? I think in other areas we're certainly promoting, or will be promoting, even more around embedding good practice around efficient and effective practices. We talked earlier about back office processes, and even about engaging with other sort of partner organisations as well, about how we can collectively work together and improve some of those processes and make more efficient. So I think there is a mantra there to repeat and embed around that general efficient and effective practice, and ensure that as business cases come forward and ideas, that they're also looked at through where there's a commercial opportunity lens as well as the various other lenses. So I think that's something we need to sort of take away and consider how we can sort of codify that in a more systematic way. If it's not as visible, perhaps as corporate scrutiny panel members would like to see it going forward.
And to sort of ask the same question to Councillor Turner, really. Obviously, I've asked from an officer perspective, how do we identify opportunities? How do we look at commercial approaches that we might take? How's that done from a political point of view within the cabinet? How are you actually coming up with ideas, and how do you source those? How do you feed those into the political decisions that the council makes?
Part of this is still relatively new, isn't it? This idea of driving being more commercial. I know it's been around a little while, but it's actually gathering pace now as we understand it. So we have, as I said, we have meetings with the officers and that we feed ideas into that, and then we work them up. So as I say, some of this is still fairly new, isn't it, to us? Some organisations are a lot more down the line of being more commercial. I think one of the things we've always said and made it very clear to officers is this is about generating extra income for the council, but also adding value to the council where possible, and also generating benefit to the local economy. So, as I've said before, here and other places, we ain't going to be buying a shopping centre in Glasgow. So it's about looking for opportunities within the organisation, and something like a solar farm might be an interesting idea. I suspect we haven't got the land, because we're not as big a landowner as most people think, and some of the land we own, we need to be building houses on. We have a target of building in excess of 1,000 homes on our own land. So, but it's something worth looking at. I mean, personally, if I was looking at solar, I'd put it on roofs, because I think that you've got a building, you've got a space that's not doing anything. So I think that's for me, that's the opportunity. Because if you take land, unless it's actually doing nothing, you're taking land out here to put some panels on, and then it can't be anything. So I think it's maximising opportunities to give you that double blow on that sort of thing. Rather than, we might want sheep or growing things on land, and once you're taking it away, you can't do that sort of thing. So I think it's the opportunities that are looking around that. Yeah. So we as I say, we're having regular discussions, and when we see an opportunity, we'll look to invest and move it forward. So yeah, we're on a journey, I think, is the honest answer. I think we're fairly at the start of a journey for this organisation, and there's a long way to go. But as I said earlier, we've had some really interesting conversations. There's some really good ideas coming out. Already some investments going out, and we maximise it. The assets we've already got, like this place and Dewsbury Town Hall, two fantastic buildings that I think we've got an opportunity to generate much more income from, become a bit more commercially minded how we market these. I think Dewsbury's we can market Dewsbury slightly different to Huddersfield. One size doesn't fit all on this. I think we have a different market in for Dewsbury Town Hall than we'd have to Huddersfield. So I think there's lots of opportunities around these two buildings, for instance, and there's already some investment gone in to market those and move those forward. So yeah, there's lots going on, but you know, we relatively small team, working really hard, come up with some really good ideas, and really passionate about what they're doing as well. That's interesting. They're really excited about this and fizzing with ideas. So yeah, we're heading in the right direction. But as I say, it's a challenge, but we'll get there.
Okay. Any members got any further questions on this item? I think the key takeaway from this would be my question would be, how do you systematically embed within the political and the officer core that search for commercial opportunity, and how are those opportunities sort of embedded within what you do? Okay. I think it would be useful if that question was answered in some shape or form. I would want that to occur. How do it? That's a key question. Do you want a time frame? Yeah, it'd be good within a couple of months. Months.
It might be the start of the new municipal year now all the time. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, next item. Preparation to leave the European Union. Who's leading on this item?
I'm just going to do a quick introduction because we have a presentation, so we'll do a bit of an introduction. As you well know, we now have a date for leaving the EU. Quite what that will mean yet is anybody's guess, because it's a date, but obviously the trade deals have got to be negotiated during the next year for the full leaving. I presume that's what they'll aim at the following year. So in preparation for that, I don't know whether you remember, we thought we were going to commission a piece of work to look at the industry in Kirklees, now workforce in Kirklees. We were going to use some of the money that we've been given by the government. Fortunately, one of our officers, along with colleagues, was able to pull in enough information from various sources across the north of England, from neighbouring authorities, and we did that in-house, and that is a really good detailed piece of work that lets us understand the current workforce, our businesses, how where they trade, whether they're importing, exporting, where their head offices may be. Some have head offices in Europe, some have head offices in this country and branches in Europe. So it's a complicated mix, but it's still important to note that about 40% of the Kirklees economy is still around manufacturing, with a good deal of that exporting. So that's really important. So that was a piece of work that was done. We discussed this just before Christmas, I think it was. We went through the report in great detail, and we now have that information. So the next step is we obviously been tasked with looking at the opportunities, what we can get out of Brexit. That might be a little bit difficult because we're not entirely sure yet what it will look like, but they've gone away to do that sort of piece of work and look at opportunities, because we have to look at the opportunity. We can't just go, oh, woe is me, we're leaving, let's try and see what we can do. But we have to look at what we can do and what opportunities may exist. So that piece of work is now ongoing as well. So we're looking at those opportunities. So we have the information, let's look at the opportunities and make the best of whatever it turns out to be, because I don't think anybody's clear yet what shape it will take. So we're prepared and we're looking forward, and we will grab what opportunities we can.
We're about to start the presentation, I guess. What opportunities do you think there are from leaving the European Union?
That's a bit of a difficult question for a Remainer. There's bound to be some opportunities, isn't it? Whether the full impact, as I said earlier, is yet to be worked out. I mean, whether we have a lower tax-based economy, which will allow companies to operate at a lower operating level, therefore helping enhancing exports. That may happen, who knows. We don't know the cost of the pound may well continue to go down. They'll make our exports cheaper. There's a whole. It's very difficult, isn't it? Because I said we don't know quite what the shape is, but there will be some opportunities. As I said, whether the potential downsides are outweighed by the opportunities is anybody's guess at this moment in time. But we will maximise where we can the opportunities, and we will support our local businesses through the Chamber of Commerce and all the SME Federation of Small Business, and we'll help them where we can and encourage them to get involved and maintain their exports in the job market.
There are always opportunities, aren't there?
Allegedly.
It's cockroaches following the nuclear apocalypse or whatever. But there we go. There's always opportunities. But there we go. So who's presenting for us? Is it yourself? Pardon?
Myself. Jonathan.
Okay, John.
I'm Strategy and Policy Officer for Sustainable Economy within the Policy and Partnerships team. Both this group and the executive team requested a piece of work be commissioned, actually, to look at the impacts of Brexit on the Kirklees economy. Because of the changing situation around Brexit, it proved very difficult to actually commission a piece of work that we could have confidence was going to add value to the work that we're doing in preparing for Brexit. So I've actually undertaken a piece of work pulling together what work has been done sub-regionally within West Yorkshire and the Leeds City region, and supplemented that with internal analysis. I'm going to take you through each of the areas that are listed. And as I say, this brings together work from West Yorkshire and the Leeds City region. So that includes a piece of trade analysis work that was commissioned in 2017, includes the Leeds City region annual and quarterly business surveys. And then the internal work I've done based on the HMRC regional trade statistics stats and the Companies House database that we have access to via Mint UK. It should be noted that as I go through different stats, it's actually going to alter which geography we're looking at. It might be Yorkshire and the Humber, might be West Yorkshire, it might be Kirklees or Kirklees and Calderdale. So first of all, just to understand how our exports actually compare as part of our economy. Within Leeds City region, Kirklees corresponds to 14% of exports. To gauge what that means for our economy, our GVA corresponds to 11% of Leeds City region. So we're slightly more reliant on exports than other districts within the area. And also on the right-hand side, exports from Calderdale and Kirklees, 49% of those go to Europe. So we're equally reliant on exports to the EU as to elsewhere. Sorry, my computer has just frozen. Always happens at the best times.
At moments. Let's see.
I have the spinning disc of death.
But we're still in the European Union at the moment, so...
Brilliant. It's actually completely crashed, so...
Do you want to turn it off and turn it on again?
I'm doing exactly that.
I think we'll just take a couple of minutes. Do you want to pause the webinar? Okay, if people want to get a cup of coffee, I believe it's only Americano that's available. Just as you. We are ready to commence, so please continue. Welcome back.
After that commercial break. Okay, so we're back into exports by sector. Again, looking at the geography, this time we're looking at the HMRC regional trade stats, so it's only available down to the Yorkshire and the Humber. We don't have more specific level analysis. So first of all, just looking at the top three, we've got manufactured goods, machinery and transport, and chemicals and related products. When you look at the red bar against the deep grey bar, we've got the EU in red and other areas. So actually looking at the comparison between those two, you can see how reliant we are on the EU or how reliant we are on exporting to other areas. So one that jumps out particularly is the dependency that we have for food and live animals, where we're heavily dependent on the EU. So looking at imports by sector, actually the order of the groupings is pretty similar. So we see chemicals and related products, machinery and transport, and manufactured goods, but in a different order. Again, we've got heavy dependency on the EU for imports of food and live animals, but then one that really jumps out 2/3 of the way down the graph is mineral fuels, which have a very low dependency, not surprisingly, on the EU. It should be noted, though, that these categories are quite broad, and so actually if we looked at individual subcategories within those, we may find that the dependency or not on the EU varies quite substantially. Now looking at EU migrant labour, around 6% of, or rather before I say that, if we, based on my own understanding of what happened in terms of EU migrants within the UK since the EU referendum, I'd understood that either it had plateaued or it actually decreased. When we look at the stats, that's not the case. There has been a 6% increase in EU workers in the UK since the referendum, but actually the trend in that has become more erratic as the certainty or lack thereof of what Brexit would look like has changed. When we look at the numbers of EU workers in Kirklees, the set of stats that I was using when I put this together indicated that around 12,000 EU workers were in Kirklees. Data that we got access to in December actually stated that this was 13,000, and of these 4,270, so around a third, had applied for settled status. 65% of those applications at the time of that data being published had been granted settled status, and the others had been granted pre-settled status. As I understand it, the kind of positive outcomes of those applications, the trend was decreasing to the point of that data being published. But we didn't have anyone at that point within Kirklees who had been denied settled status completely. Should also be noted that at that point there was a backlog nationally of around 500,000 applications, though that was in December, so that may have changed. Just the last point on this slide, the percentage of workers within very low, or shouldn't say very low, but low skilled roles across LCR is much higher than nationally, and particularly within roles such as process operatives, storage roles, elementary roles within plants. So packers, bottlers, those kind of roles that are actually very, very simple roles. Now, I looked at as I mentioned before, the Mint UK database from companies' house data to understand how is employment divided across different sectors within Kirklees. To understand if any of these sectors are actually impacted by Brexit, where do we need to be paying the most attention? And I've analysed that based on all of our employers and then the top 100 employers within Kirklees. So looking at the top 5, we've got wholesale and retail trade, manufacturing, human health and social work activities, education, and admin and support services. What's interesting, particularly when we look at that, is actually the strong role that public sector services have within that. So within education and human health and social work. It's also interesting to note that halfway down this graph, we've got construction, and though they make it into the top 10, actually none of the top 100 employers fall within that group. So we've got a predominance of much smaller organisations working in that sector. I looked through the same database at companies that either were owned by EU companies, so they were subsidiaries of EU companies, or that had EU-based companies. Found that 79 Kirklees companies actually are owned by EU-based companies, and obviously I mean by that outside of the UK. We also have when we look at those companies, there are actually 5 EU companies that have more than one company within Kirklees, and they account for a total of 3,200 employees. So that's quite a significant role for 5 organisations to play. Also, 19 Kirklees businesses have EU-based subsidiaries. What's particularly interesting are the 4 that are both owned by EU-based companies and have EU-based subsidiaries. So they're placed in the middle of a corporate structure, which may imply particular risks or concerns to those organisations in terms of those corporations looking at how they're structured and deciding whether or not those companies continue to play a role or have a changed role in that structure. The last point is just around business views and preparedness. This is taken from the Leeds City Region Annual Business Survey. What's very clear is that more businesses see negative impacts of Brexit than positive impacts. And this may vary across sectors. Also, larger companies are much more likely to have considered and prepared for Brexit than smaller businesses. So those are the main points. And so I just wanted to open up for any questions on that.
Can we go back to the previous
Sure.
one? Again, I'll leave that up there, actually. That's, I think that's a good focus for discussion. Okay.
Yeah, I was interested in your trading analysis with EU and non-EU, but how much of that trade with non-EU is dependent upon EU trade negotiations as opposed to independent trade negotiations?
I think, given where we are in terms of obviously we're going into a period now of negotiating a trade settlement. We don't know what that trade settlement will look like, or what areas either the British side or the EU side are most concerned about protecting or encouraging trade in. So it's very difficult to actually pick off different sectors and say there's a particular opportunity or risk to this sector until we get further down the road and see what course we're going to see in the way that the FTA is negotiated, or any particular points within that.
I'm not quite sure you understood my question.
Possibly not.
Because you showed the trade export to EU and export to non-EU countries.
Yes.
export to non-EU countries while we're a member of the EU may or may not be subject to EU negotiated trade agreements with those countries. And I wondered what proportion of that export was down to working with EU negotiated trade with non-EU countries.
Can I help out there, Chair? Jonathan, would you mind just knocking your mic off? We don't have the answer to that question really, because it's a really good question, and I think if we can find some data and evidence that helps us analyse that, we'll come back to that question, because I think what you're implying is there'll be some block agreements through the EU that we will be benefiting from as the UK. How much of that 49% that is non-EU is reliant on that block agreement? Is that the question? Yeah. Okay.
Just on that point, a lot of those block agreements, there's already transitionary arrangements in place with those countries to replicate those. So I think we just need to pick up, because I think Canada was the one that didn't agree to replicate the Canada deal, but most of the other countries, the likes of South Korea, I know was one, for example, and Australia and some others, they've already agreed to replicate the deal they've got with the EU with the UK when they leave Brexit. So I think that the Department for whatever it is, I think it's international. I don't know if it's international trade or exit in the EU, but one of them has been negotiating these deals, because you can see them occasionally on Twitter that are the ones being agreed. So I think a lot of them have been agreed, but we ought to be able to get that information.
I was sort of going to say similar to John, but from a slightly different perspective, in that I don't think we've got anywhere as near as many as we'd like to. I think it's certainly less than 20 last time I checked, and I think there was about 79 trade deals that we had as part of custom. Is it three quarters? Okay, that's news to me. But if we are now leaving the customs union under Boris's deal, so any that were not replicated before we leave the transitional arrangements at the end of December will be falling onto WTO terms with regard to those countries. So yeah, be interesting if we were able to, and I know it's very difficult, as Jonathan sort of said, to be able to, if we were to be able to look at what WTO tariffs are on those particular goods and industries and try and apply that to those exports, if we can get the data to know where it goes, as to what impact it might have on Kirklees businesses. I know that's incredibly difficult and we don't have the data at the moment, but that would be a really interesting piece of work.
But I guess one of the things we're not really leaving the EU on the 31st of January, are we? That was the headline, but we are continuing to operate without control through to the 31st of December. So the real Brexit is at the end of this year, and so at that point we will begin to discover some of the realities, or there'll be an extension to the date, which I guess is going to happen because the general election's 5 years away.
We do actually leave the EU on the 31st of January. What we're not doing, the transition period, is for the trade agreement, so that there are transitional arrangements until the end of the year. So nothing changes from a trading point of view, but politically we are leaving the EU on the 31st of January. So I think... Yeah, but we've left the EU. We've agreed. So I think, Andrew, all I'm doing is pointing out that if we're being accurate, we should report accurately, and actually we will be leaving the EU institutions on the 31st of January. We have transitional arrangements. We have transitional arrangements in place, which currently are due to expire at the end of the year. And I think we should leave it at that at the moment, because that's legally where we are, and anything else is supposition, really, because we don't know what will happen yet.
Just have a bit of fun with that, John. I remember when Labour's position was a customs union and strong single market alignment, which is effectively, but without being in the political institutions of the EU, which is effectively what we're going to have now until December, and we were told that's not leaving the EU. But I do agree with John. We are leaving the political institution of the European Union on the 31st of January. We won't be represented there anymore. But if I can steal and distort a Peter Mandelson's phrase for a minute, Yeah, I think he said, we're all Thatcherites now. I think whether we like it or not, we're all Brexiteers now because this is the reality that we live in, and we're all going to be making the best of it. I do worry that we've seen what effect Brexit has had on the bandwidth of government over the last 3 years, that they've been able to achieve absolutely nothing domestically, or even with regard to the EU negotiations, which was a constant failure for 3 years. I do worry that the Department for International Trade, however hard, who's there? Is it Liz Truss still? Mm-hmm. However hard Liz Truss tries to find some new pork markets or cheese or whatever it is she's talking about next month. The negotiations with the EU to get the comprehensive trade deal that we need to keep as much market access as possible. Sorry. Those negotiations are going to consume the government wholly, that will struggle to get any further with those trade deals that we have as part of the customs union. And I think that is going to, as we've seen, given that 51% of Kirklees exports go to non-EU countries, that's something that we're going to have to look at really, really closely.
We are, but we're in danger of falling into the national sport of talking about Brexit, which I thought the general election was supposed to stop and get it done, as it were. Okay, anything more on this before we move on? Please do.
One thing that should be clear is that things do change clearly on the 31st of January in terms of trade, which is that anyone who exports to the EU will require export documentation, which for businesses that only export to the EU will be the first time that they've had to do any export documentation. So that's a significant new challenge that will start on the 1st of February for those businesses.
Right. Okay, I didn't realise that. Use the microphones, please.
But that's from December, not from the 1st of February.
As we understand it, it's from the 1st of February. That was confirmed through conversations with the Chamber of Commerce and the FSB. It also is coherent with the fact that the government were doing an information campaign around that during at least October, if not before that, saying that from the 1st of November, documentation would have changed.
Sorry, can you repeat? So was that for exports to non-EU countries or to EU countries?
That's exports to EU countries, which currently don't require any paperwork, which will now require paperwork, which will be similar to what is used to other destinations currently.
So do we have, this will be national rather than anything that we've looked at, I imagine, but do we know of any idea about what, because obviously it's not just tariffs that add costs to businesses, administrative barriers are a significant issue as well. Has there been, do we have any insight into the effect that could have with regard on businesses and what effect it might have on the ports, slowing down the transition of goods?
I might actually request some support from Sue on responding to that one.
The short answer is no. The problem is there's the lack of detail in terms of paperwork and the process for being able to undertake that activity. As Jonathan said, the Chamber has led us to believe this will commence on the 1st of February, and as yet they don't have any idea about what the changes are. They're trying to gear themselves up with additional workers who can pick up any challenges that they have in terms of inquiries from the 1st of February, but we have no further information yet.
Yeah, I'm not going to, as we're webcast, I'm not going to say the word I was going to say, but that's appalling, if it's true. Okay, we do need to know that.
Suggest something that we will confirm as a post note to this meeting to you in terms of absolute clarity, but we know that the Chamber have been concerned about this for some weeks and months, and if you recall, when we were due to leave the European Union on the 31st of October, you'll have seen the signs on the motorway about advising people that they would need new documentation, and the Chamber have been trying to get that clarity, but as Sue has just said, haven't as yet been able to give that. But we will just, the only niggle I have in my mind is that was that 1st of November deadline associated with a no deal scenario. Yeah, and we just need to confirm for you as a panel that it hasn't fallen away because there is no prospect of no deal on the 1st of February.
Please do. And can we have, as soon as, essentially, for members of the panel, just a clarification over what the situation is? Because obviously, if there's any doubt on something like that, we'd like that clarifying. Thank you.
It was if it was no deal. It was if it was no deal on the 1st of November, there'll be changes in documentation, but there's no prospect of no deal on the 1st of February, so I don't understand why. That's fine. Yeah. That's fine.
Okay, anything more on the topic of Brexit, or shall we move on? Oh,
I just wondered what the outcome was going to be for the Kirk lease with looked after children from EU origins after yesterday's bill was passed, which excluded 2 clauses that gave some protection.
Very good question. Is there anybody here who can answer that?
No, I can't answer it. I've dealt with this issue in a previous role in the council. Because the announcement has only just come through, there will be obviously a lot of work to look at this. I've no doubt that Children's Services will be doing all they can to help these children and analyse what the impact is on those children already here, etc. Just one thing, going back to what we talked about, and just to sort of sum it up, is we've clearly got a lot of things that's going to change this year, and I can assure you that we will constantly be looking and checking up on things and preparing for the final withdrawal in December, whatever that form takes. So there will be work going on all year with the relevant organisations, Chamber of Commerce, FSP, government, etc. So I presume we'll want us to come back every meeting to report on progress, but I can assure you that I, along with officers, will be working during the year as things become clear. Once we know one thing, we'll be able to work on that. At this moment in time, it's all a bit foggy, but the fog will start to clear as the year goes on, and I can assure you that we will be working to make sure that we maximise the opportunities and we minimise any disruption for us as a council and the residents of Kirklees.
One comment on Graham's comment. I'm not sure the fog will clear quickly, because I suspect if there's a negotiation or a trade agreement, there will be negotiations right up until the last minute. And there will be all sorts of stuff said in advance that probably will be, sort of negotiating positions from various sides. So are you right that we need to be on with it all year, Graham? But I don't think the fog will clear early. I think it'll be at the last minute.
I think the problem with that is if we wait till December, the fog clears on one morning, then I'm not going to use the word I was going to use neither, because we're really stuffed there now because we can't do everything instantly. So I'm hoping that stuff comes out over there so we can deal with it as it comes, because if it all just comes in one day, we as a country, and I use the collective we can't cope with that. If we put a load of changes in one day, the changes have got to be fed in over the year so we can deal with them. A huge change on one day, the country will grind to a halt, unfortunately.
Okay, fog in the channel, etc. Okay, let's move on to the next item. Thank you, officers, for your help with this. Much appreciated. We now move on to the update on inclusion and diversity, the annual report. Over to David.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. As the committee is probably aware, the council has a 4-year Inclusion and Diversity Action Plan. And we are legally obliged to publish an annual report on each of our years. We've just completed year 2 of our action plan, and this report outlines the annual report that will be published on our website and go through to Cabinet and full Council at subsequent meetings this year. So, in the report, what we've tried to do over the last 2 annual reports is highlight areas of progress, but also be transparent about areas of improvement that we still need to make. Because obviously there are issues that will roll over from last time, and new issues that occur throughout the year as well. So I'll talk you through some of the highlights and areas of improvement in the report. I'm not going into too much detail because there's obviously a lot here. There's 3 parts to the report in a way. There's the annual report, there's the action plan that we're reporting on in Appendix 1, which actually states out the outcomes we're hoping to achieve in the activities. But the annual report I'm going to refer to in a moment. And also, in Appendix 3, there's the national inclusion standards that we entered the first time last year and achieved our bronze award for that, which actually influences our progress in the next year. And it's a good benchmark for my national organisation about where we are and where we need to actually be in the coming couple of years. So just turning the page. Thank you. So the first area in the action plan was around a committed and diverse workforce, and to really focus on the number of areas is the data we produce and collect around our workforce, which we have vastly improved that. We now report on all of the 9 protected characteristic groups, and that data goes to all management teams and goes to Cabinet as well. We've made good progress at an area in the action plan about improving representation at grade 17 to 21 across BME and also disability, which is really testimony to colleagues doing tremendous outreach work in our communities, attracting more people to generate applications and really working hard with local community groups to overcome our quite clunky application process, if you like, which can be a barrier to people. We've also improved our uptake of apprenticeships and working with candidates. That has gone up significantly, and a regional level 5 apprenticeship programme where we have incorporated representatives from our employee networks, specifically, which has been a real step forward for them to improve their career progression. In this area, there are clear areas for improvement, but we still need to actually look at the barriers in our recruitment processes, like our job profiles, which still sometimes include unnecessary qualifications, for example, that we don't really need in there. So there's a job to do in how we actually analyse how we recruit. More links to our local education establishments are definitely a priority, because there is a wealth of talent on our doorstep that we are not attracting into the council that we could be doing more on. So links to those institutions are now being made more robustly, and I think obviously with the university and Kirklees colleges. And we were also, there's a programme we tried last year to get off the ground around supported internships. That's where people with a learning disability can come into a post and get a support worker working with them for a while to actually getting used to the job. I think we did not make as much progress on the number of services taking that offer up. So this year we'll be drilling down more into actually why that didn't happen, and hopefully offering more opportunities that particular client group, who again are underrepresented in that area. Positive and inclusive approach, which is the next section in the action plan. We've taken part again in National Inclusion Week. I hope you're aware of that back in September. Which we got a real high profile to. We're celebrating and sharing good practice on our Intercultural Cities programme, which we are now an active member award. We've got a Diversity Awards event next month on the 20th of February across Kirklees. Just to pick out some other maybe highlights, we have an inclusive leadership session at our council management group, which went down very well. All employee networks, which are really excellent resources in the council, have been boosted in terms of their resource and time, and recognise that they are contributing to the core business of the council by a nice add-on. So that's really been extra support by management for that, and politically has been really welcome. Again, areas to work on, without a doubt. I think we need to expand the way we work with partners. In fact, I had a meeting with the university only this week where we can collaborate this year further on offering placements to students in the university, and also cross-fertilisation of work around our employee networks, etc. That needs to happen. I think, again, barriers about volunteering. There's a specific action in the plan last year where we look at why our profile of volunteers was not representative of the workforce. And that data's come back, and we are now analysing that to see what actions we need to put in place to rectify that situation, really. And again, we also need to, I think, embed an inclusive leadership culture in our managers in the organisation. Good practice is there in places, but it's not standard practice in the way that managers are actually supporting staff would be probably a fair assessment of the situation. So if work is going on to actually support managers to actually improve their sort of skill set around that way of working. Okay. Moving on to the next section. So we harassment, bullying and discrimination. We have boosted the availability of material for our officers to access around data packs about information around cases, also the e-learning pack is available. But again, we recognise that on this we have to communicate better what it actually means by this whole current area of work. People don't understand what we mean by being harassment in the workplace. So a lot of intensive work is going on with our staff and managers around this. I think a real success, though, is in the next section is our partnership approach to resettlement and integration. A real heads up for Sarah Mitchell, our resettlement officer, who's worked tirelessly to improve our welcome programme for migrants and asylum seekers. And as you can see from there, the stats have gone up quite markedly, and people are now feel more welcome and better supported in our communities. We have a mentoring scheme for our new arrivals who are mentors are existing people here already actually who have been through that process and are supporting new arrivals to actually bed down into Kirklees and access services. Still more to do, but I think that's been a real success in a way. As a whole list here of complementary actions, I won't go through in detail, but I reflect, I think, the real incredible amount of work we have done throughout the years. Just to maybe pick out a couple of examples, we recognised in the high five awards and diversity, the success that people have had within 1984 in regards to the local government chronicle. We've revised our impact assessment process, which now includes additional groups and an environmental aspect as well, which I'm sure we have about. So that's now been rolled out as well. And also we have supported the application for the Windrush with KLS TV as well. So that's the action plan itself. And that's our really successes and areas of improvement there. Yeah. The next section, again, I won't go into enough detail, it's only actual national inclusion standards that we actually got a bronze award for. So in that standard, there are 6 pillars that you have to submit evidence for. And if you turn the page, thank you. I'll put the okay, so there are 6 pillars around the national inclusion standards here that is run by an organisation called National Inclusion Employers, and they are an independent body that assess and accredit us with either gold, silver, bronze, or a non-achievement award. So I think the bronze award is about right where we are. Yeah, I'm happy that we actually come out with bronze because we do still need to make progress in a number of areas. So the layout here, it recognises our strengths in each area, that we have a good strategy. For example, on the engaged part, it recognises that we actually do have good leadership from the top, but also it recognises that we, throughout this feedback, we are not really embedding inclusion and diversity right through the organisation as we could do. So issues like performance management processes need to include inclusion and diversity more explicitly, and that can include senior managers, middle managers, and maybe councillors too, in terms of having targets around inclusion and diversity in their available. So annual targets to look at. Yeah. So interesting to get from an external body really. The other areas that I pointed out, our networks are growing, definitely, but our networks need to be part of our decision-making process more explicitly than they are. Yeah, growing our becoming more robust and more confident, but probably not integral to how we make decisions in the council. So again, something we need to look at without the out. And I think the last area I was focused on is how we evaluate what we do. I think we still are not that good at actually when we engage with other staff or communities around diversity issues, we're not so good at saying, right, we've consulted and engaged on this, but in terms of why we're doing that and getting that because then you said we did, yeah, that's not happening systematically. So I think that can improve as well. I'll stop there because
it's fine. Thank you. Over to you. Any particular questions, Councillor Taylor?
Comments really more than questions. I was pleased to see in the report some references to working carers, but I still think this is an area where we're perhaps not capturing enough data yet, and we're not reporting any of the data yet. And for me, although it's not one of the prescribed groups under the legislation, it's something that increasingly we as a community need to recognise there are going to be more of us that are performing unpaid caring roles, and we need to be looking at how we're supporting people in employment that are in those situations. So I'm pleased to see some reference to it, but I think there's more to do in that area. I also, this might be a bit controversial, but when you talk about being intolerant of bullying and harassment and things, in that section you make reference to supporting employees, managers and service users. I would have thought we ought to mention counsellors in there as well, because they could be, they could occasionally be harassing or bullying, potentially. Or be harassed or bullied, maybe. I think it's more likely the former. But I think, perhaps we ought to make reference, and if there is training that's being made available, we oughtn't to exclude us from that. And then I'll just finish on, I love the terminology of equality to inclusion. I think that I just love that statement. I think that's exactly what we should be attempting to achieve. So thank you, David.
Yes, just have a quick indication. I think there's a lot of progress here, and it's quite interesting. It's quite a complicated area as far as I can understand as well. I'm just wondering whether we're looking at the volunteers and the workforce within Kirklees, how that relates to the overall distribution of these groups across Kirklees population.
Yeah, it's very important. So, in terms of BME, in terms of the workforce, we currently are about, in totality, that 14%, yeah? And that compares to, roughly in our communities, about 21%. So we are below that in terms of representative, yeah? On disability, our totality in the workforce is 30%, where it's 5% in the community, yeah? So you can see there is a disparity there in terms of how we reflect the workforce. And I think what's driving us to improve that is that most organisations are looking at this now, is the greater diversity of the workforce, the greater your productivity is. Because you're bringing in different opinions, different ideas, different perspectives from people in different backgrounds, and that adds to your, well, in our context, our better service delivery. Because that means that our innovation comes from people that know the issues and really can feed that into service delivery. So you're absolutely right. In terms of how we step up against population, there's still work to do to increase that proportion in the workforce.
The one thing that just came to mind while you were speaking, David, and thank you for the report, it's clearly a lot of really good work that's happening and is ongoing. I was reminded of when we had one of the employee wellbeing reports come to this committee a few meetings ago, and we were talking about one juncture mental health support that was available to employees, and they were talking about how they'd over the last year been getting more data to understand where those what services those individuals were coming from, so that we could identify if there were any issues and where gaps might be. And it just sort of sprung to mind, there's, the workforce profile data is soon going to be published, and that's going to give us a really good idea of the workforce profile. I just thought it might be helpful potentially. I don't know, I'd be interested to hear others' perspectives if the wellbeing team we were able to integrate this work with the work that's going on there, because it might be helpful with that data to bring it together to give us an understanding as to if there's any gaps in support for any particular group, or if any particular group are being missed or ignored and need additional support that they could help deliver that might, marry these two things together.
No, it's a really good point, Captain. We do have a wellbeing network in the council, that does provide support and advice and guidance around these issues, including mental health, stress, anxiety, etc. And they become more active, and they have put on a number of events and support packages to sort of support management and stuff as well. But I think it's one of those issues that It's a little bit like our LGBT employees face about declaring that in the workplace can be a real issue. People are still quite fearful of actually coming out with a anxiety issue or a mental health experience. I think, it might sound a bland answer, but I think the culture we need to actually try and move to is where people feel able to actually declare their needs from that perspective, where it's still possibly more stigmatised than other impairments or disabilities, and it's to me very akin to the LGBTQ issue about actually coming out. So I think that's down to us to, picking up on the point about moving from equality to inclusion. That's the very point. Yeah, we can have as many people in the workforce with diverse backgrounds. If they don't feel included and supported and able to actually discuss those issues in the workplace, then we are missing a massive trick there. But certainly I'll take that back and ask the Wellbeing Network whether we can actually look at that more closely. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Question I have, that's the bullying aspect, really. One of the things that I wonder is about what engagement we have with the unions on this. I think about some of the issues that we've been looking at as a council recently, and how we actually ensure that the unions have a similar perspective to the council about bullying, about understanding how we address it as a council, and seeing how we engage with that. I can see Councillor Turner is wanting to intervene. So that's one area. The item that Councillor Taylor brought up was about councillors, and I also wondered about the visibility to officers about the member officer protocol that we have regarding how councillors and officers should behave towards each other. So I wonder about that visibility, wonder about the unions. Councillor Turner, do you want to
mention those then? Yeah, if you want, yeah. I mean, we put in place, probably 6-9 months ago now, a new protocol for working with unions, so we have more regular meetings with them. So all those issues will be picked up through those regular meetings. So unions have a specific meeting with each directorate, and then every quarter we have what we call joint consultative groups, which was actually, funnily enough, early this week. So where we get all the union representatives, all the directors and myself in a room, and we go through a fairly general. So there's a lot more dialogue now, earlier, with unions, rather than, it's more proactive rather than being reactive. So there's a constant dialogue with them, with the directors, with myself. So there's a lot more dialogue going on than there used to be under the new protocol. So you'd like to think those issues were picked up. Clearly at the moment we have we have a gap in our ability to negotiate with unions, so we're doing that slightly differently because of the changes that one of the unions has made. But that is ongoing. Just going back to some of the data, one of the things that's interesting is that HR are now a lot better at picking up our staffing levels, what gender, etc. I think it's fair to say probably 18 months, 2 years ago, that information wasn't that great. Deborah's put a lot of time and effort in to improve that information. So we have a lot more information coming out now. We have a lot more understanding of what our workforce is, the age groups, the demographics and all that sort of thing, which is really useful because obviously we can workforce plan for the future. We have more of an idea when people are likely to retire, whereas I think that's fair to say that wasn't the case a few years ago. The information, there's a lot more information, and I meet Deborah every month and we go through the workforce as we did with the unions on Tuesday. So with the unions are part of that information, and every month or every few months that information grows, so the database gets more and more updated and more accurate. So there's a lot of work going on besides what David does, which I think this is great, this stuff. And some of the things from HR, I think it's worth mentioning that we had the High Fives event in October, where we recognised how the excellent staff we've got and pulled some of those people out and gave them a bit of an award and give them an evening out. So, there's a lot of really good stuff going on, and like we mentioned, we've made a lot of progress in a fairly short space of time, and I'm sure David and his team will continue to drive this forward, and we'll do even greater things in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Do you want to say anything about the member officer protocol and how visible that is to members, so we could address bullying that may come from councillors or two councillors even in that way? How visible is that?
You want me to answer that? Yes. It's always difficult, isn't it? Because everybody has a different relationship with officers, because some people only come across them occasionally. Some of us who are here all week come across them daily, so they have a different relationship, don't they? I think I'll try to be diplomatic. I think I think younger members of the council are less prone to bullying or trying to bully officers than perhaps some of the older members, because I think there's, some of the people have been around a long time. That was, it's difficult, isn't it? Times were different 30, 40 years ago, weren't they? And some people, as we have been found out in various other parts of the world and other parts of the society, what was acceptable 40 years ago is now not acceptable. And some people have found it difficult to change the way they deal with officers. So some people may have a robust conversation with officers. Now the officer may find that bullying, the person having that conversation may not. So it's difficult and easy because times change. And I think there's probably less bullying now than probably was 30, 40 years ago, if I'm brutally honest. Or what would be perceived as to be bullied now, which probably wasn't then. It was just like, we're going to have an argument, a stand-up argument. So it's really, it's difficult, isn't it?
So it sounds. Yes. Thank you for your. No, that's fine. Thank you for your reflections. Okay, so it's the older councillors, which I guess includes me now, who are the really dangerous ones.
No, I didn't say it was necessarily the older councillors. As I said, they may yes and no what you're trying to do, but I'm playing the game as well, because otherwise it doesn't become entertaining, does it? As I said, what was acceptable behaviour many years ago is now not acceptable, and that's absolutely the right thing that should happen. So I suspect there's less. We recognise bullying as a problem now. I don't think bullying was recognised as a great problem when I was at school. Things have changed. We recognise what people say can be offensive to some people and can be deemed bullying. And perhaps that was, as I said, 30, 40 years ago, some of that was acceptable. Wrong at the time, but now we understand that.
Quick point on that.
Yeah, please, David.
This is what Councillor Turner is saying. I think we do highlight the protocol in induction to councillors. Yes, without doubt. It has been also recently part of the programme of work of the Democracy Commission, putting the councillors at the heart of the organisation. So that has been part of the workshops that we've done across the council with managers. Yes. Both in Huddlesville and GSB. So the protocol has been aired, but there's probably an area of caution there that it's probably not returned to on a regular basis, I would say. Yeah, again, that embedding process is still there to be looked at, I think.
I've suggested on more than one occasion that the key elements of the member officer protocol be put on a poster and put on a wall, probably in most of the group rooms in the building. Put on we have all sorts of things that we put on walls about stuff, but the relationship between how councillors and officers should behave to each other is not there a lot of the time. I think having that constant reminder about how we should conduct ourselves is important. Right?
That might be something that should be looked at during the new council induction programme for those that run that programme.
Induction programme saying behave yourself I think is not there. You yourself said that it's these older councillors who've been around for a long time, like me, that are actually the difficulty in the problem. Okay, any more on this? I think we've all finished torturing Councillor Turner.
No, let's have a bit more.
Okay, right. So There we go. Let's just look at the rest of the agenda. So we'll just look at the work programme going forward. I think we've got a fairly packed and interesting work programme going forward from the discussion we had. Anybody want to comment on any of it and have any views on any of it? Quick look over. Okay, so thank you everybody for your contributions today, and this meeting is closed. Thank you.